couple of years ago, I had a period of time where I was having some pretty severe muscle cramps. Sometimes they'd wake me up in the middle of the night. I'd jump out of bed, dance around like a crazy person. Or other times, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, my toes would contract like something kind of out of a horror movie. One time I was sitting peacefully on the couch watching TV when I had a leg cramp so bad, worse than anything else I'd ever experienced. It literally knocked me on the floor, and it didn't let up. The next day, my entire calf was black and blue. It was like the muscle was tearing itself apart. It was right about then I learned the vital importance of two very simple things: water and electrolytes. Okay, potassium, magnesium, sodium, to name a couple of the big ones. So basically what I really needed was just a little more salt in my life. Now, I know that sometimes salt gets a bad rap, and if you struggle with hypertension and high blood pressure, then I do encourage you to do whatever your doctor tells you to do. But personally, I'm a big believer in really good, unrefined sea salt. This is the stuff that I use. It's called Redmond's. It's mined in like Utah in an ancient seabed somewhere. And so I put this on everything, and along with my magnesium supplement I take it every night, I rarely get muscle cramps anymore. So little everyday things like salt and light, and we're going to be exploring a little bit more. That's our theme for this month. Little things like that can make a big difference. They seem so ordinary. We interact with them all the time, salt and light. But everything they touch, everything they interact with is changed in a fundamental way. So for instance, salt does all kinds of things. It preserves, it fertilizes, it enhances flavor. It's why we like it in our food. It also provides important nutrients for our bodies, for chemical processes in our bodies. It's essential for life. The same is true with light. Our bodies turn sunlight into vitamin D. We absolutely need sunlight, just like the plants do. And the presence of light, even just a simple candle flame in the middle of darkness, it can allow us to see in the dark. It can allow us to navigate. In Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he compared his disciples, he compared us to salt and light. He wanted us to know that we are called to serve a purpose like they do. We don't exist simply for ourselves, but to change the world by our presence in it. That's what we're called to do. Just by our presence, to change our environment. In Eugene Peterson's Message translation of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, and this is found in Matthew 5 of that translation, "Let me tell you why you are here," he says. "You are here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm going to put you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven." Salt and light are vital. They're vital to life and growth. Sometimes, like with my leg cramps, you don't realize how important they are, right? You don't realize the good that they do until they're taken away. Then you really begin to see, by their absence, what they do. It's kind of like a parable I ran across this past week. It's a parable about a picturesque village at the edge of the Alpine Mountains. It sits in a little beautiful valley. And for many years, the town council of this village had hired this old man who lived up in the forest above the village to clear away debris from the springs that fed the river that flowed through their town. And so he was just up there, quietly patrolling the hills, removing leaves and branches and anything else that might contaminate, choke off the crystal clear water that flowed through their town. So meanwhile, in the village, swans, they swam on the crystal clear river. The farmlands down there were naturally irrigated by this water, this fresh water, and the view was beautiful beyond description, attracting many tourists to the town. So years passed that way, uneventfully. And then one evening, the town council met for its semi-annual meeting, and as they reviewed the village budget for that year, one man's eye caught the salary figure being paid this obscure keeper of the springs. Since no one ever really saw him, and they weren't sure what he even did, they decided by unanimous vote that they would dispense with the old man's service. And so they did. And for a few weeks, nothing changed. By early autumn, though, people began to notice that the river had begun to change colors, not in a good way. Before long, there was an odor, and then pretty soon the swans left, and so did the tourists, and inevitably people in the town began to get sick. The embarrassed town council met quickly, called a special meeting, acknowledged their mistake. They hired back the old keeper of the springs, and within a few weeks, the water had returned to its old state. It was clean. Health and life returned to the village. What a difference one person can make. You probably remember the holiday classic, It's a Wonderful Life. If you got through Christmas without seeing it, I'd be surprised. So there's a scene, if you've seen the movie, you remember this scene where Jimmy Stewart's character, George Bailey, is given a chance to see what his little hometown of Bedford Falls would have been like had he never lived, or had he died at a young age, right? If he'd never been around. Because he was feeling hopeless, suicidal even, like he never made a difference in any way. And if you remember, when he goes back and sees Bedford Falls, as it would have been without him, it was a much darker and meaner place without him. Now multiply that by hundreds and thousands and millions of faithful disciples, each shining their lights, each being salt and seasoning wherever they're at. Now, of course, the church, I always like to acknowledge the fact that the church as an institution has made its share of mistakes. There have been times in history when it's failed in its mission, but imagine how much worse it would have been and would be still if individual believers hadn't continued to do their part right where they were. I've always believed in the vital importance of the local church, which is us, right? This is where God's kingdom, God's love engages the world. It's where the hungry are fed. It's where the good news is proclaimed. It's where we see people's lives transformed, and we do. Now, I'm not saying good things can't happen, in boardrooms, in general assemblies, and things like that, but the church has always engaged the world in places where people live and work and go to school every day, on the ground. As a local church, we are on the front lines of God's work in the world. We are the church, and wherever we go, we are salt and light. We are changing the world by our presence in it, or at least that's what we're called to do. That's what we were created to do. That's what we were challenged to do by Jesus. In other words, we function a lot like that old man who is quietly clearing away the debris in the hills. We might think we're small. We might think we're insignificant, when in fact we are influencing the world in ways that reverberate beyond what we could ever know. When we serve with love and humility and joy, the world around us is changed for good. An unknown poet once described the impact of a single life like this. The slightest breeze that ever blew, some slender grass has wavered. The smallest life I ever knew, some other life has flavored. We cannot live our lives alone, for other lives we touch are either strengthened by our own or weakened just as much. So what he's saying there at the end is it could go either way. That's why Jesus talked about salt losing its saltiness or light being hidden from view. It doesn't make any sense. for those things not to do what they are made to do, but it can happen. And I think sometimes we might think we can remain neutral, right? Not really being one or the other, but chances are we're either adding to the light or we're taking it away. Where we live, where we're at, in our environment. We're either seasoning the world around us for good, or we're bringing something to the table that's not so good. Back during the pandemic, I preached a sermon where I talked about disease vectors, things that spread disease. For instance, deer ticks. It scared me to death because they're so teeny, and I seem like I get one every single year when I'm out working in the yard in some strange places. They spread Lyme disease, right? It's scary. Mosquitoes can be a vector of malaria, and if we're not careful, we can be a vector not only of COVID and the flu, which is going around. I just heard somebody had COVID and both types of flu all at the same time. We can do that. But we can also be vectors of things, of spiritual things that are much darker. So we have a choice to make. We really do. In the places where we live and work. That means home. That means the office. That means where you go to school, right? Those circles where you are every single day, are you going to be a vector of good news or bad? Are you going to be a vector of things that bring life and light? Or something else. You get to make that choice. Will we bring vitality to the world or something else? Now again, this might seem like it's requiring us to do something big, something momentous, right? We might even imagine that our task is to do something so the whole world can see it. And while that might sometimes be the case for some people, I think most of the time it's not at all. It's about little things. I mean, really little things. We don't have to save the world. We just need to look around and see what we need to do in our immediate vicinity. It might even just be checking our own attitude occasionally. It's like the story that I love about Benjamin Franklin. It's an old story about how he noticed that the darkness on the streets of his hometown in Philadelphia caused some real problems for people. And so he vowed that he was going to do something about it. He believed that gas streetlights, although they didn't have electricity back then at this point, he believed that was going to be the answer to create some safety and stuff for people in the city. And so he talked about it, he campaigned about it, he wrote letters to the editor about it. Then one evening he looked out the window of his house and he noticed that his own front yard was completely engulfed in darkness. So he went and he got a gas lantern and he put it up in front of his house and he went out every evening and he lit it. And pretty soon he noticed that another light appeared in the yard across the street, in his neighbor's yard. And pretty soon another one down the way did the same thing until the whole street was lit up. And then that idea spread to the next street and to the next until before long pretty much the whole city of Philadelphia was illuminated. That's how it works. That's how the world is changed. That's how the church has always changed the world, not top down. It's not how the Roman Empire was overcome, was converted one by one. It's kind of like when we passed the light of Christ from one to another on Christmas Eve, one of my favorite moments of the year. Everybody gets a light. Everybody passes that light from one person to another until the entire church is lit up. And the local church, of course, is one of the best places for us to practice that. It's why the Apostle Paul reminded the early church over and over again that they were the body of Christ. Like the human body, the church needs everybody doing their part, everybody using their gifts in order for the body to function as it should. As a pastor, I'm always amazed by the good things that happen when everybody is doing their part to be salt and light. So just as an example, last Sunday they promised a bunch of snow. We didn't get that much, but it was still enough and kept a lot of people home. But I got up a little earlier than usual. I grabbed my leaf blower, blew some snow off of my own driveway, came in. I was going to do the same around the doors here. Guess what? Somebody had already thought of it and had already done it. It was almost done by the time I got here. So I went on to do something else, only to find that was already done. And I looked around, and the lights were on, and communion was being prepped, and the choir was getting prepared, and they were getting ready for kids back in that space. Food was being cooked for FCC Cafe. No one person was making all that happen. My sister reminded me just this past week that teamwork makes the dream work. I like that. That's what the body of Christ looks like in action. And believe me, it goes much deeper than just those kind of simple routine tasks that we do all the time. Those things are important, but there are other things that are even more important. On a typical Sunday, I try to get around. I try to talk to as many people as I can. I want to check in with folks that I think might need some support of some kind. I also look for new people who are sitting alone. And no matter how much ground I cover, we're big enough that I still worry that I've overlooked something, or worse, I've overlooked someone, maybe, that needed attention. But then I notice, and this is the thing I love most of all, that I'm not alone in that either. Every week I see people praying together. I see you encouraging one another. I see people seeking out folks who are sitting by themselves or that need help in some way. I see people being welcomed and drawn into the love of Jesus. I see people being salt and light here. And I'm blessed to be a part of that. I hope you are too. You might think what you do on a Sunday morning and then again on a Monday morning somewhere else doesn't matter that much in the larger scheme of things. But it does. There's an old Jewish legend I love. I've been obsessed with this idea since I was literally in seminary, which is when I learned about it. And it's an idea that comes out of Jewish mysticism. And the idea is that there are 36 righteous people in the world at any given time throughout history who are essentially responsible for the fate of humanity. They're called Lamed Vavniks, which is literally Hebrew for 36ers. They're one of the 36. And the legend goes that no matter how bad things get in the world, God preserves it because of these 36 people. These Lamed Vavniks don't know who they are. No one does. Only God knows who they are. They are deployed throughout the world, often serving in the humblest and simplest of ways. But because of their kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, the world is kept from flying apart at the seams. And it would if they weren't out there doing their thing. I think we should all strive to be Lamed Vavniks, one of the 36. We may not be famous. We might not think our lives matter that much or what we do matters that much. But when we seek to be salt and light for God, no matter how small the task, God is able to do far more in us and through us than we could ever ask or imagine. So leave the light on. Keep seasoning the world around you because God doesn't just expect it, God is counting on it.